Hey NBA2K fans, in this video we're going to talk about the best controller settings to use in NBA2K, and we'll walk you through what I use and why I use it. And when you get done watching the video, you'll have a better understanding of how the controller settings work and what you ought to use. If you are new to the channel, I am Coach 2K. While you're here, hit the subscribe button, click the bell to get notified whenever I upload anything new so you don't miss a single NBA 2K video I put out. And while you're here, check out my fictional My League series. I'll put a link up in the corner there and you can start watching from the first episode. Alright, so with that, let's get started and let's talk about the best controller settings to use in the game. First setting here is for the DualShock 4 wireless controller speaker. You have two options, on or off, and I turned that off. And actually this is kind of, I think, an annoying feature because all that really comes through that is the whistle for fouls. None of the other game noise comes through, and so because it's annoying, I always set that to off. Next up is vibration, and in the case of vibration, the main use of it in the game these days is just to kind of give you a signal of the proper release timing, but I found it's more distracting than anything and probably messes your timing up. There used to be that you'd have vibration in key moments in the game, and I'm not even sure that's still in the game. And so because of all that, you have two options here, on or off, and for vibration I elect to just turn that off. The next controller setting is shot timing. There are three options here: shots and layups, shots only, and real player percentage. Now, I did a real in-depth video on the difference between real player percentage and user timing, and I'll put a link to that video in the corner of the video so that you can hear more of my thoughts on the difference. But in a nutshell, user timing means you have to control the release point, and real player percentage just means that all you have to do is decide to shoot and the computer decides the release point for you. So most of the time I leave this on shots and layups, and the reason I do that is because if you're going to play online, you don't have a real player percentage, so the only option for real player percentage to use that is when you play the CPU. If you're playing another user, the only option is for shots and layups. So if you're going to be playing online a lot, then you want to get used to timing because that's the way the game's set up. If you're going to play offline all the time, you want to use real player percentage. You don't want to worry about timing. That's okay. You can certainly just use real player percentage. Me personally, most of the time I have it on shots and layups. You could just put it on shots only because sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to time the layups because it's harder to see. At least I think it is. But for the most part, I always leave it on shots and layups, and that's how I handle shot timing. Alright, the next controller setting is free throw timing. A lot like shot timing, the setting right above it. There's two options here, user timing and real player percentage. Only affects free throws though. And the best option here is probably user timing. If you're going to be playing online, then user timing is the only choice you're going to have if you're playing a human opponent. Now, if you're going to be playing the CPU all the time, then you do have the option to use real player percentage. And again, the real player percentage just takes out any responsibility on you to time the shot properly. The CPU times it for you, where user timing, you time it. So since I do play a lot online, my default method here is just to use it on user timing. But if I'm playing the CPU a lot, I will kick it over here to real player percentage just to provide a little bit more randomness to what happens in my free throw game against the CPU. But for the most part, you're going to play online, user timing, that's the way I'd go. Next controller setting is for the Pro Stick function. There's three options: default, dribble moves, and shots. And since I was playing the game long before the Pro Stick had a function, I just leave it on default because that's the way it's always worked. So honestly, I haven't looked at using the Pro Stick function for dribble moves specifically or for shots specifically. I just leave it on default. I kind of recommend you do too, unless you're like a super dribbler and you want to get in there and kind of figure out how to do that. In my case, I leave that on default. Now the next controller setting is the Pro Stick orientation. And here there's two options, absolute or camera relative. And the difference between these two, absolute means that whatever direction you push the stick is the same no matter which direction your player is facing. And camera relative means that you have to adjust which direction you push the stick if the player is oriented into a different way facing the basket. So let me show you what I mean here, and let's start with the absolute Pro Stick orientation. And I think the best way to kind of illustrate how the Pro Stick orientation works is by using the floater to show you kind of how this setting affects your gameplay. Now, in absolute setting, if I want to trigger a floater and I'm driving into the paint, I'll drive into the paint and I'll pull straight down on the stick here, and that will trigger the floater. Now, if I want to trigger the floater from the baseline on absolute, I do the same thing. I drive into range to do a floater, and then I pull straight down on the stick, and you can see I shoot a floater. Okay? Now, on camera relative, though, it's going to work a little bit different. All right, now let's change the Pro Stick orientation from absolute to camera relative and just show you how that affects the ability to do the floater on the screen here. So let's go back to freestyle mode here. Now, if I want to do a floater, you remember that all I had to do was get into kind of the floater range there and then pull straight down on the stick. Now, if I do that from here, it'll still trigger the floater if I pull straight down on the stick. And however, if I move to the baseline, you can see now that my player is facing the basket from a different direction. And so if I want to trigger the floater, if I pull straight down, what's going to happen here is I move into floater range and I trigger the floater. Instead, it triggers a different move. It doesn't trigger the floater. So instead, what I have to do to trigger the floater on camera relative is I have to pull the stick to the right instead of straight down. And so if I do that here, you can see I shoot a floater if I pull the stick straight to the right. And so that's the difference between absolute and camera relative. Now, when I'm playing, I have a tough time orienting the player. I always want to know up is up, down is down, left is left, right is right. So I leave this on absolute. So that way, every time I want to trigger a floater, I know I can get in position to do it and pull straight down no matter where I am on the court, and I'll trigger the floater just like I want to. And so that's why I leave that on absolute. All right, the next controller setting is off-ball freelance mode. And just like the Pro Stick orientation, you got two settings, absolute and camera relative. I just use this camera relative. I don't even worry about it. If you're going to be playing off-ball like in my career or in a player lock situation, I can see where you might want to change this to absolute, because this is when you're not going to have the basketball. So I just typically leave it on camera relative and don't worry about it. Next up is player icons. Has two options, on or off, and I set this to on so I can see the player icons. That way I know who I'm selecting to throw the ball to. And so what that looks like here is I pull up the icons, and then I know, for example, if I want to throw it out here to my power forward, which is Thaddeus Young, I can just hit triangle, and it's a lot easier than for me, because I can't tell sometimes who the players are because it's harder for me to see the screen because I'm a little bit older, but it's easier for me to see the icons. So I leave that on because of that reason. Next up is the skip pass. Two options, enabled and disabled, and I leave this enabled, although I don't typically use skip pass. I usually icon pass everything. So if you wanted to get in the habit of using the skip pass, you can do that if you wanted to. So I just recommend you leave that enabled. That way, if you decide you want to use the button to do a skip pass as opposed to icon passing to that player, you can do that. All right, the next controller setting is for icon lead passing. This has an option to be on or off. I turn this on because I like to be able to kind of direct my player with the icon with the stick, and so I leave this on. The next setting is the Pro Stick pass type, and there's two settings, normal or flashy, and I set this on normal. And I do that because if I want to trigger a flashy pass, I would just do it manually. So in this particular case, I just leave it on normal. That way it doesn't throw a flashy pass if I don't want a flashy pass thrown. Okay, the next controller setting is for icon passing, and there's the default setting, full receiver control or pass type control, and I put this on full receiver control. Pass type control didn't work properly in my opinion. I considered pass type control, but it doesn't work for the center. So let me show you what I mean by pass type control. So here I am in scrimmage mode. I just want to show you how the pass type control works in the icon passing feature. So if I want to throw the pass to Bogdanovich over here on the left, normally I would just tap triangle and throw a chest pass. And if I want to use pass type control and I want to throw a bounce pass to Bogdanovich, but through the icon passing, I can pull the icons up, double tap square, and it'll throw a bounce pass to Bogdanovich in that situation. Now, the only problem that I ran into when I did this is that if I wanted to throw a bounce pass to the center position, the double tap, that doesn't always work. So I didn't think it was as reliable. And also, if I want to throw an overhead pass through pass type control, it didn't seem like it was available to me. So I prefer to leave it on full receiver control. Let me show you how that works. So let's change it from pass type control to full receiver control and go back to scrimmage mode here. And same thing here, you pull up the icons, but if I want to kind of move Young out to receive the pass away from the defender, what I would do is just hold the triangle down and pull the stick towards the half court line and then release, and then I can get away from the defender. So that's what the full receiver control does, and I like that option a little bit better. So in terms of the settings, that particular setting for controller settings, that's why I have it on full receiver control. Alright, the next controller setting is receiver control, and there's two options, full receiver control and the handoff pitch pass. Now for this option, I'm not very good at the handoffs, and it's hard for me to drag the guy by, so I don't use the handoff pitch pass. I just use full receiver control. So maybe you can work with it on your own and see how you can trigger it, but I'm just not very good at it, so I just decided to go with full receiver control and just not worry about it. Although there are lots of handoff plays in the game, it'd be nice to run them better. And I've seen the CPU run them really well sometimes, but I have a difficult time with that, and so I just leave it on full receiver control. Alright, the next controller setting is for the Pro Stick defense, and you have absolute or camera relative here. And just like I use the Pro Stick orientation on absolute above, I do the same thing for the Pro Stick defense, which is right stick defense, so that I always know that whatever direction I push the stick in will always do the same thing regardless of what orientation, which direction the player's facing. I know that I'll defend the way that I want, and so I don't use camera relative here, I use absolute because of that. The next setting is who to guard. You can turn it on or off. I always leave it on just because it's a little bit easier to track down who you need to be guarding. At one time, I always think in terms, if you want to be a true Hall of Fame player, you'd want to turn off all assist. And so if you want to make the game a little bit more difficult, then I'd turn that off. But I always leave it on just so I can track people down a little bit quicker because, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of an older guy. It makes it a little bit easier for me. And same thing with defensive assist with intensity and box out assist strength. I set these both to 0, so there's no CPU assistance, and everything has to be done manually. So I don't put these on anything. I set them at 0. All right, the next section down at the bottom here is the pass target profile. Relatively new over the last year or two. We have the default, openness, direction, custom, so you can set your own settings. And I got to tell you here, I just leave this on default. I don't have a lot of confidence in it finding the right player. I'm a big time icon passer, or I just use the stick to pass, and I don't rely on the target profile to find somebody for me, so I just leave it on default. So just to show you real quick how I might do that, like here, you'll notice when you look at the screen, you see Turner down there in the post. There's a white circle around his feet there. So if I just pass the ball to him, if I just hit pass, I know it's gonna go to him because that's where the circle is. Now, if Turner wanted to pass the ball, right now you see it's under Bogdanovich. So if I just hit X, it's gonna go to him. Now, if I want to change it from Turner, instead throw it to Young, I would just push the stick towards Young, and then the circle goes under him, and then I know if I hit X, it'll go to him. So rather than relying on this pass target profile that's in here, that's kind of how I handle passing, and I don't rely on this pass target profile at all. A couple final tips here as far as controller settings go. One thing I would do is you can always set the controller settings in the main options of the game, but you also want to set it within whatever game mode you're in, because it doesn't always carry over. And the other thing I do just as a backup is when I go into a game, at the beginning of a game, I always pause the game to make sure everything's set up right. I always double check the controller settings to make sure they're the way that I want them to be. So I always suggest that you change the settings in every game mode to what you want them, and also double check before you enter a game to make sure the settings are the way that you want them to be. Alright, so I hope that helps you understand the controller settings a little bit better, let you know what I use. Let me know down in the comments if you don't agree with me, and if you got any other questions or suggestions about the controller settings, just let me know down in the comments. Alright, I'm Coach 2K. I'll see you on the court in the next video. Thanks for watching.